Welcome to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. This is our weekly venture into the world of small to medium-sized businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives success.
So our goal here is to help you grow and to be the best you can be, both in business and personally. To do that, we identify and we discuss topics that will hopefully help you as you work to build a successful business.
We also interview business owners and executives. It's our hope that you may be able to gain insight on ways to help you be a better leader and provide a better culture for your people.
Our mission here is to help you pull the chute once a week to work on your business instead of always working in your business.
So we hope you find these discussions insightful, helpful, and useful.
And thanks for your support. We hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. As always, we are so excited that you are here supporting us. And things are really kind of heating up around the Pull the Chute area. So many podcasts. We're actually closing in on our 200th podcast, Jana. Can you believe it already? That's crazy.
Yay. I love it.
I know. Who would have ever thunk, right?
Yes.
It's crazy. How are things in Nashville, Jana?
They're good. Beautiful day today. I think we're done with our rain for a while and it's gorgeous. And, hump day here. It's a Wednesday and everything's good.
Yes, and we love it. We love it. So, Jana, we have a very special guest today, and Denise Young is here. By the way, first of all, Denise, welcome to the show. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Denise Young is one of my clients that we've been together for the last year, and she wrote a book that we're going to talk a little bit about today. But I'm just excited that she's even on the show to be able to share her journey and her story a little bit. So, Denise, do us a favor for our listeners and give them give them a brief background about who you are and how you got to where you're at today. And as soon as she starts talking, you'll all know that she's from up in Canada. Yo.
Yo
and about. That's what my cousins from down south always laugh at me about. Yeah, so a little bit about my background, I guess. Like in terms of work-wise, I've worked in a lot of different industries. I started off, I would say my most thing is, I started off in the media industry. I worked for radio, I worked for television, and then I continued on and I started working for municipalities. And I was doing, I guess my major job at the city of Edmonton, which I absolutely loved, was corporate culture consultant, which meant that I was responsible for shifting and transforming a culture for about 12,000 people, which was, it was easy. Anyway, and then I just decided to say, you know what? I want to move. I moved provinces. I was tired of the minus 50 weather. Yes, I just said it, minus 50. And what had happened was I moved to sunny Kelowna, British Columbia, and took off my own business. And this was really a risk for me and this is kind of leading into why I wrote the book too, was that it was a journey having my business. And I find today, 7 years after launching my business, I really feel I'm in a good place and I'm really, I still kind of mess up in terms of being authentic because sometimes, systems are in place where we feel we have to be somebody who we're not, but I feel that, I'm authentic about 90% of the time, unless I feel like I'm kind of backed into a corner. And with this book, it's been a long time coming. It's been about a 2.5-year journey. I had it actually written in 2 weeks and over 2 years. And then just the last piece of the editing and things like that took me a long time, but that was also part of my authentic journey because that was a journey in itself because I was doing the self-doubt. I was having that, saying, I can't do it. I don't know if I want, if anybody even wants to read it. So that's a little bit about myself and kind of my journey to where I am today.
So Denise, I want to get into this book a little bit because I know that's a big, that's a big deal when you write a book. Jeff and I both have written books. We understand that. Finding My Place, Authentic Leadership. So Denise, give us some high points on it. When you say authentic leadership, obviously some of your not struggle, but is finding your place as a woman, all of that. Inclusion, we talked a little bit about it before we pushed the record button, but let's get into a little bit of some of the high points of the book.
Yeah, I guess this book, when I really think about the audience and that type of thing, the reason I wrote this book was, I guess, for our own self-healing journey for my own self. However, I also really wanted other people to maybe kind of resonate with my stories and to say, okay, this is, oh, I'm not alone in this journey. And I think some of the things that I really talk about is a lot of the times we separate our professional life and our personal life. And so what I did with this book was I really kind of integrated everything. So I shared some of my personal stories, I shared some of my professional stories, and then kind of wrapping it up on each chapter around why is this, why is this even important for leadership? And I think the thing to remember here is that people think leadership is in the formal sense. And I know with you too, with your coaching practices and what you do with the leadership programs, it's more than that. All of us are leaders. All of us have the power to change. But how do we do this? We have to do it by understanding our own selves first. Some of the stuff, like as I put in the book, it's not so nice stuff. Like there's been some really wow moments where I've been uncovering my own, if you want to call it, our biases and things like that. And I just believe that this book is really focuses on how do we move forward without shaming or blaming ourselves and other people.
That's
And I
great.
think that's yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the first step in leadership is knowing who you are as a leader. And then understanding, like you said, your patterns. Those patterns are formed at a really early age, as we all know. We've talked about this. Jeff and I have talked about this a lot with other coaches and such. And that is these formative years from, like I always say, 3 to 16, 17. It all depends on so many aspects of our of how we were raised and such. So it's almost getting that stuff out of the way and understanding what you want out of your teams, as a leader. So I agree with that. I think we all have biases. We can't help it. We only have our own perspective. We're only living in our own skin. We only have our own brains that talk to us constantly.
And some
Yes.
of this stuff is not nice.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very true. Most of it isn't. Our brains, our subconscious likes to talk back a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Denise, let's dig a little deeper on this, understanding your own self. Why that's so important. Kind of explain to our listeners in your terms, in your words, why you feel that's so important.
Well, I think when we understand our own selves, from my, I guess, perspective, when I started understanding my own self, which, I'm over 50, and I would have to say about 5 years ago, I just really started understanding myself. And it was just really important because you start accepting yourself forward. Because how many of us, if we're in that negative headspace or whatever, and we're not understanding ourselves and maybe we're blaming other people, that we can never move forward in our lives. And I think for me, understanding myself was, I'm going to share some of the content I put in the book. So I'm adopted, as I mentioned in the introduction. I'm adopted. My brother's adopted, and my sister's my parents' biological daughter. And just growing up was, I joked about it and said, yeah, we had a multicultural family, but I never really understood the impact of my adoption had on me. And that was, it drove every single thing I did. And I remember there was one instance where we had to do a family tree, and I think I was like grade 3 or 4. And I remember this moment so clearly. And I was like, I remember having that, that tenseness and saying, I don't know what to do. I said, do I talk about my family that adopted me? Do I talk about my biological family, which I have no idea about, yet I did not want to ask the teacher because I didn't want to seem as being not normal. And I think as we go through, most of us get wiser with age. And I think as we start understanding ourselves and understanding, kind of what you were talking about earlier, Jen, is that most of our stuff is is focused from our childhood. And once we know where those triggers are coming from, that's just, it's hard for me to put into words about understanding yourself, but I just really feel even writing this book was such a therapeutic thing for me, and saying, oh, that's why I did what I did. Oh, that's why that happened. And there were so many times, even throughout the book, I was sharing stories where I'd start blaming somebody, and that wasn't the intent of the book. But then by the end of that chapter, I was like, oh, that was my piece in it because this is what it stemmed from.
Mhm. Well, we all have patterns like that. I mean, behavioral patterns. I've done a lot of study on brain science and behavioral patterns from our formative years in our childhood, and how I mean, it's part of our fight, flight, or freeze nature, our biology, to try to find the easiest and safest path as children, or the least confrontational. That's part of our biology. So a lot of times you do cover up a lot of these patterns that we develop at a young age. And then what happens when you get in the workplace, suddenly in your 20s and early 30s, is that stuff all starts to come out, right? And so there probably is a lot of blame early on with a lot of professionals. And I'm not generalizing, but I'm saying I think it's a really smart thing to do, Denise, to look at your crap, as we say, your cheese. Don't touch my cheese. That book was so big in I think it was the 80s or whatever. It's like looking at your stuff and saying, okay, now I've got to look at this from a point of view of what my tendency is in how I compensate or how I justify, and get out of the way of that. Try to find the path that is much more consistent and not blameful, or not patterned after what you grew up with. I think that's good. That is an aspect, isn't it, Jeff, of leadership that a lot of people don't talk about, when they talk about being a leader, or,
Yeah.
I'm suddenly a leader of a big company or whatever. But those patterns are set in our brains.
That's how when Denise and I were working on the book, I was so intrigued by her analysis of things that occurred in her life and how that formed who she is today. And that's what we're talking about, right? Like, examining yourself, understanding yourself, learning from those different aspects. And Denise, you said this one thing which I really loved. You said you got to move forward without shaming or blaming others, right?
Mhm.
Because I think that's really important. As a society, we have a tendency to blame others, right?
Mhm.
There's some commercial out for somebody. It's about the scapegoat. I forget what it was recently, right? And I was laughing hysterically because everyone's always pointing fingers at somebody else, but in reality, kind of point the finger back at yourself, and that makes true leadership really good. I don't know. I'm assuming, Denise, that writing this book really helped you to kind of understand who you are and how you got to where you're at today.
Yes, it did. And there was one chapter specifically where I was working with this client for 5 years. And as I was writing it, it was probably one of the harder chapters I did, because I realized how much harassment, like specifically sexual harassment, I was enduring. And I remember as I was writing it, kind of coming back to the thing about no shame, no blame for, especially for ourselves, was I was just embarrassed. I was like, wow. I said, okay, I teach this stuff. I teach about how to, make, inclusive spaces. I have so many friends with daughters. I have nieces. I said, how could I do this? How could I endure this for 5 years? And I remember just sitting there writing my book. This was like kind of the second half of the book, and just bawling. And then after I moved through it, I was like, but when I look at all of the journey I had, so many of us say, oh, I wish I didn't do this. And that is one thing I think where I have never done, where I just flip it and I just say, all of my experiences, whether they're good or bad, and we should be labeling it, but we do. And it just makes us who we are today.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think going through these things, will I ever do that again? Heck no. And I think that's the part of this journey of just saying, yeah, we're gonna mess up. But if we don't mess up, we're never going to move forward. And usually these mess ups are learning opportunities, because if everything goes perfect for us all the time, and I don't know if there's anybody out there that says their life is perfect, that's okay. And we have to be okay in the messiness. We have to be okay with our imperfections. And getting back to leadership is like, so many of us too sometimes think that we have to be either saviors or heroic, meaning that we have to know everything. We don't. And when we show vulnerability, that's when people want to follow us, because they're like, oh, okay, they are actually human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's important too. And I think, I think we all believe this, but people come and go in our lives, circumstances come and go in our lives. And depending on how we handle those, if we can realize that those situations, those people were there for a reason and we've learned from them, right? That's important, right? I mean, so many times people have a tendency to go, this person came into my life and destroyed my life. Well, did they really, or did you allow that? I mean, there's all these areas there, but I think that's an important feature and aspect that we got to continue to remember, is that if we can allow people to come into our lives and just look and say, why are they part of my life right now?
Yeah.
And then learn from that. I think it's huge.
I think it's the only way. When you really think about it, imagine always blaming others your entire life for circumstances that you dealt with all through your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, up into your elder years. I mean, I don't think that's that's not our job as a human being. Don't you guys think? I think it's more about, okay, why did this happen? Like, did I have something to do with it? I need to look inside and say, how did I either attract this, or why did I attract this, or what's the lesson in it? And I think leaders are really, in my opinion, the leaders I like to follow and the people that I really admire are the ones that will call themselves on their stuff. They're willing to say, you know what, I think I screwed up here. You guys have any suggestions as to how we might do this better? That's a leader that, absolutely, I agree with you, Denise. I want to follow that leader because they're real. Nobody wants perfection. We can't, we can't ever match it. So who wants it in your leadership or in your partners in business? Certainly not. It's a team sport,
Yeah. Yeah, and I usually say too that, especially when I got out of a situation, I say, yeah, that was shitty. However,
Yeah.
it's also was my choice to stay in it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think sometimes, and it's not taking away from what that person did, and it's not giving them a card out, but I will say too, when you forgive people, you're not forgiving them for them, you're forgiving them for yourself. So some of the situations I just had to move out of, and I still to this day don't wish anybody harm, but you're forgiving them so you can heal and you can get over it. And when you start really looking at yourself and saying, yeah, you know what? It's not about a 50-50. Yeah, that person had no right to do what they did. However, what is my piece in it, even if it's a sliver? Because usually, and I know for me, sometimes it takes you years to understand. There was one situation in the book where I think as I was writing it, I realized, oh, that was my piece in it. Took me 5 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. And other times you can pick it up right away and say, you know what? Nope, that's my piece to own. And I think it's a journey. It really is about leadership, and you never stop unlearning. And I think that's what it is with leadership too. You're constantly learning about yourself, about other people. You're actively listening, and those are all those key pieces as well.
Yeah. So, Denise, the name of the book is Finding My Place, The Journey to Authentic Leadership. I want to dive back into, we started the show with this, but I want to dive back into it a little bit. In your mind, now that you've finished the book and you've gone through this journey, and define authentic leadership for our listeners in your mind.
Well, I think authentic leadership is, if you take the word authentic, what does that really mean? And it's being yourself. And if you're a naturally more, and I say even in terms of personality, because sometimes, if there's, because sometimes systems are also in place of saying what makes a good leader. And you must be this, you must be this. And especially as a woman, being, for example, in a male dominated industry, sometimes you feel you need to be like them. And it's like, no, true authentic leadership is being, if you're naturally more assertive or whatever you want to call it, then yeah, continue on that. But authentic leadership is really about being your true self and being true to your values and aligning everything that you do. So for example, with me, I look at, what makes me authentic leader. It's because I'm just a naturally, what do you call it? I remember I used to think, oh yeah, I'm a very expressive talker. I have to kind of calm that down a little bit because I've been told several times to, you're too much. And yeah, you probably understand this because
I do.
And then I would say over the last 2 years, I'm like, yeah, I'm too much. I own it though. And when I say too much, I laugh at it. And I just say, yeah, if you can't handle me, you shouldn't be in my circle then. And I think it's whoever we are as people, we just need to be true to ourselves, have that vulnerability. We don't have to make excuses. And I always say, ego is good as long as you keep it in check, because our ego also helps us drive us on an individual thing. But being authentic too is saying, leave my ego at the door and have these conversations and lead with authenticity. Because I find when you show that vulnerability, whether it is that people will start doing that as well. And that's what I've learned, like when I'm in spaces, it's just whenever I go into any of the workshops or anything I do, I usually share a story about myself right off the bat. So it almost kind of gets the room to say, wow, she's, because a lot of the times people think that the instructor is meant to talk at you and not talk with you. And I just say, you know what? We're in this room today, we're having a conversation. And even that's part of my authentic journey too, was because I used to be, when I was teaching or whatever, I had so much feedback of what I should be doing better. And I'm going, but that didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like spewing facts and research, and that was part of my thing, right? And me being authentic, it's like, no, I'm authentic because I love sharing stories. I love having conversations. I love connecting. So why can't I do that in a workshop or or a leadership training? Why does it all have to be facts? And I think those are some of those specific examples of what authentic leadership means to me.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm going to dive into an area here, and you have no idea I'm diving into this, but I was touched. Denise and I did a conference in Edmonton in February, I believe, March, which I lost track now. One of those two. And she was introducing her book. Now, here's the crazy part. When she wrote her book, she spent some time with her dad because her dad had to have surgery. So she gave her dad the book and asked dad to read the book. Now, the crazy part is, again, dad had no idea all these things had happened to her. And so after her dad read the book, he actually wrote the foreword. And so I'm going to take a minute and read the foreword because I just think it's so profound that your dad wrote your foreword and had no idea when he first read the book of all the things that were in there. He said, Denise Young is one of the relatively few people I know who has dedicated her life to making the world better. To do this, she has created Tiger's Eye Advisory Group that offers a variety of services, including workshops, motivational keynotes, and facilitation services in areas of communications and inclusive leadership practices. Way to go, Dad, for plugging the book earlier and plugging your services earlier. I love that part.
Yeah.
Right? Let's just jump right into exactly what Denise does. I love it. Then he goes on to say, this book explores how Denise overcame challenges in her search to find her purpose in life and how she came to believe that authentic leadership is the key to success for both individuals and organizations. The challenges she overcame include an identity crisis from being adopted, discrimination from being multiracial, and physical constraints from inheriting, I can't even say this word, thalassemia.
Thalassemia.
Thalassemia, there you go, thank you. The book is not a linear autobiography, but a collection of reflections, stories, and lessons that provide an intimate and fascinating insight into Denise's quest to become an authentic leader and her consuming desire to help others learn to do so as well. As Denise's father, I feel that I did not really know Denise until I read this book. That is a very strong statement. I had no idea how severe her challenges have been and how hard she had struggled to overcome them. I believe that others reading this book will be inspired to dig deeper into who they are by admitting their weaknesses and their vulnerabilities and coming to see the insights gained from this admission as doorways to improvement and progress. Denise emphasizes throughout the book that learning to admit one's vulnerabilities to others is his organization creates a safe space where others feel free to do the same. Providing a space encourages empathy, mutual assistance, and assistance rather than competition. Denise also argues the team members should celebrate progress rather than perfection. Growth comes from continuous reflection and action, not from unattainable ideal completion. In brief, I believe in this book is unique. Its emphasis upon honest self-reflection as the key to developing true leadership is illustrated with numerous examples from Denise's own life. I hope that these examples, some sad, some humorous, but all interesting and insightful, will inspire you as much as they have inspired me. Dr. David Young.
So neat.
What a great.
I know.
Yes.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I want to share that just because for your dad to see that, and he's in his 80s, right?
Yeah, he just turned 88.
88.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And I was telling Jeff this. I said the interesting part about that too, that was actually part of my journey too, because I never felt I measured up to my dad, right? Because he was very extremely, still is, very, very academic, very smart, and I still remember when and I was so scared about him reading my book, but yet he was on me. He's, I really want to edit your book, Denise. He goes, can you send me the chapters? And I kept stalling. And I'm like, going, and then we spent, he had hip surgery. So he was hanging around, and I just finally said, I need to give him something to do. And I wanted him to read the book, but I was just so scared. And then after, I still remember we were sitting outside, and because, Denise, he goes, that book's really interesting. And I'm like, yeah, you're just saying that because you're my daughter. And he's like, no. And I just said, oh, and I was shocked. And he goes, well, why are you shocked? And I said, you're so up here in terms of smarts. And, I can't remember what I went on a bit. And I just said, so I didn't think you would enjoy reading my book because it has no facts. It has no research. And he just kind of laughed, and he's like, no, he goes, that's why it was so refreshing. He goes, it was nice just to hear stories and your experiences. And so that has always stuck out for me, because that was part of my journey too, is that I just didn't think anybody wanted to read my book. So I stalled on it.
It's so interesting.
Yeah. But every time, I read that, I get a little teary eyed because
it's just amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
We kind of have to wrap things up here, but I really wanted to share that because I just found it so, again, talk about being authentic. Your dad's just interpretation of your book was just amazing to me. So
that's great.
Thank you.
So Denise, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
On my website, so tigerseye.ca, and my book is available on amazon.ca and amazon.com. And I think it's actually even in the UK too. I think I listed it on as many markets as I could.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time.
No problem. Finding My Place, The Journey to Authentic Leadership by Denise Young. Look it up, support her. She just launched the book recently. So, we're excited about this book. Just excited to how it can affect people and change people's lives. And she's just sharing her journey. I think something I'd love for us all to remember is that we all think we're the only ones going through stuff. And the reality is that we're all going through stuff. And so if we can start sharing that with each other and share those journeys with each other, I think it just make us that much better. So again, Denise, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
To all the listeners out there, thank you as always for supporting Jana and I. We love the emails. I've gotten several recently that just loved certain aspects of some of the podcasts that we've had. We're just really having a lot of fun, Jana, you and I, right? We're just
Yes, we are.
It's just been great.
Well, and like you said, Jeff, people are just people, we're all going through our stuff. There's no such thing as the perfect life. It doesn't happen. That's not our job. That's not
Right.
our journey.
We don't live in Hollywood. What? Come on.
Yeah, no, I did my whole
I know. That's why I
early
said that.
career. And guess what? They're a lot worse off than we are. Don't
I
tell them
love
I said that, but let me tell you.
it. Okay, well, we got to wrap this up. But to all our listeners out there, till the next time, folks, stay safe and be healthy.